Welcome back to the Constitutional Clarion. Today I'm going to talk about a question that I've been asked a couple of times. People with sharp eyes have noticed that in the third paragraph of section 129 of this proposed amendment, there is a provision that allows Parliament to make laws about the other functions and powers that the voice might have, above and beyond its power to make representations to the executive government and to Parliament. So what might those powers be? And the concern has been raised that perhaps that power might be legislative power itself. So what if the Parliament legislated to confer its legislative power on the voice, and the voice therefore got to make laws for Australia? Could that happen? And the answer is no. So how do we know that? Well, there's a little bit of lawyers' magic language in there, and that is those words subject to this Constitution. And so what does that mean? It means that when Parliament has the power to legislate with respect to the voice and give it powers, that power of Parliament is subject to not only any express limitations in the Constitution, but also implied limitations. And where do they come from? Well, they come from things like the federal system in the Constitution, the system of representative democracy that's in the Constitution, and, critically, the separation of powers in the Constitution. So that's where we need to look to answer this question. So what does separation of powers mean? Well, it means that both as a structural matter and as a textual matter, the Constitution separates power and gives it to different institutions. So if you look at Chapter 1 of the Constitution, it gives legislative power to the Parliament. And if you look at Chapter 2 of the Constitution, it gives that executive power to the government through the role of the monarch and the Governor-General. And if you look at Chapter 3 of the Constitution, it gives judicial power to the courts. Okay, so that happens through the structure of the chapters, but it also happens through different sections. So if you're going back to Parliament and what powers it can deal with, you need to look at Section 1 of the Constitution, which not only gives power, the legislative power to Parliament, but it also defines the Parliament and says that Parliament is made up of the two houses. So you've got your House of Representatives and your Senate, and also the representative of the executive, which comes in the form of what was the Queen, but now the King. Okay, so they're the three elements of Parliament. Now, critically here, the voice is not in Chapter 1, it's way down the other end of the Constitution separately in Chapter 9. The voice is not defined as part of the Parliament, so it can't operate as part of the Parliament like another House of Parliament, okay, because it's not in Chapter 1, it's not in that definition. And finally, the Parliament can't confer its legislative power onto the voice because the legislative power is conferred by the Constitution onto the Parliament in Chapter 1 of the Constitution. So it can't do that. Equally, because the Constitution confers that power on Parliament, it can't abdicate that power. And so what do I mean by that? It can't say, we, the Parliament, we can't enact this law until someone else gives us permission to do that, like the voice. Okay? It's not able to do that. It doesn't have the capacity to do that because that would be in breach of Chapter 1 of the Constitution, which confers the entirety of that legislative power onto the Parliament itself. So we needn't be concerned about the voice being given legislative powers by the Parliament because structurally that is not possible. So then the question is, well, what's it there for? What sort of powers might be given to the voice? Well, one sort of power might be just powers to aid it to fulfil its responsibilities, so an ability to hold inquiries or to get information from land councils or other bodies that are on the ground that can give it the information it needs to be able to make proper representations to government. So that sort of thing. But the most important thing that it might be given power in relation to is its interaction with the states. As you know, most laws in Australia that affect Indigenous Australians are actually not Commonwealth laws, they're state laws. state and local government laws. So on that basis, we've seen most of the states either start creating or talk about creating their own voice. And the big question is how the voice nationally, if it's created, will interact with the states and with their own voices. And that could happen in a number of different ways, and we really won't know until a national voice is created and some discussion is then held with the states about how to deal with this. Now, remembering again that Parliament's power to legislate about the voice is subject to this Constitution, and that means it is subject to the principles of federalism in the Constitution. So that means that the Parliament couldn't give the voice powers that would some way override the states. It means because of those principles of federalism, the states would need to be involved cooperatively and agree if they want to have some kind of interaction with the voice. So those are matters for the future as to whether or not the Parliament uses those powers in section 129(3) to give the voice any future powers, but it won't be doing it to give the voice legislative power. And if it does give the voice power in relation to dealing with the states, it's going to be doing that on the basis of some level of cooperation with the states to satisfy the federal requirements of the Constitution. Hope that was useful, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.